just because it was against Buffalo Bills backups doesn't make Caleb Williams' performance on Sunday any less important or reassuring.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we'll break down what we saw from the Bears starters, mostly on offense with Caleb Williams and company, really stealing the show and looking every bit the part we were hoping for against the Buffalo Bills. But then we'll check in on some of the other position battles and depth chart updates we got from this game, including some movement at the wide receiver position, on the offensive line, and in the defensive line, where maybe some clarity starting to happen up front on both sides of the ball. And then we'll wrap up checking in on the injuries that I think are going to impact this 53-man roster, both at cornerback with Terrell Smith going down with the injury, and then running back, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel at that position as well, and maybe what moves could be coming in the future as a result of those injuries. But this two-drive performance we saw from Caleb Williams and the starting offense was exactly what we were looking for. Like, this to me is like proof of concept that, hey, this can work, and when it works, this is what it looks like. And that is true whether it's against backups or whether it's against starters, whether it's a preseason game or not. Like, the impressive parts of this for me were the parts that are, I guess maybe I'll say the most impressive parts, or the parts that are sort of irrespective of the opponent, the things that are largely in the Bears' control, right? Like, I'm not going to get too fired up specifically about, like, you know, the touchdown pass to Olamide Zaccheaus, right? The little slant route, and then Zaccheaus makes a guy miss and runs away to the end zone. Like, yeah, against starters, that play is not a touchdown, but that's not the important, like, so I'm not going to get like impressed with, like, oh wow, they look at all the playmaking that they had after the catch. Like, okay, that's the kind of thing that's maybe a little bit more opponent dependent. But the things about this starting offensive performance that I was so encouraged by is just how structured and in rhythm Caleb and the offense looked. They came out passing fast and furious, and I think that was pretty intentional by Ben Johnson. I think it was 3 straight passing plays before their first run had a holding penalty, and then they passed again right after that before finally getting another run in there. But they only handed the ball off, I think technically only once on that opening drive, because one of the handoffs was called back by a penalty. So they very clearly wanted to come out throwing and get the passing game into a rhythm, and that happened very quickly when it comes to like timing. So, you know, first play out of the gates, a rollout to the right to check down to Loveland. Like, that's not so much like footwork timing as it is just sort of like, hey, let's get something moving. Let's complete a pass. Let's move the ball forward in the passing game. But then, like, next play, it's like 5-step drop, hitch, fire, seam to Cole Kmet. Like, on time, crisp footwork, accurate delivered ball over the top of the underneath coverage, exactly where you want it to be, exactly how you want it to look. And then right back, like 3-step drop, curl route to DJ Moore, right on time. Ball is out when it needs to go there. It's synced up with the footwork in the way that we've heard Ben Johnson hammering home over and over and over again. And maybe those are some of the things that at first we talk about Caleb Williams taking some time to adjust to and adapt to. But very clearly, when they threw a bunch of things on Caleb Williams, right? They were having him work through all this stuff. Now we get into a preseason game. We scale it back down, right? And we go curl route. We go slant route. We go roll out. Right? Simple, basic concepts that they know Caleb Williams can handle, and they execute it to near perfection there. Like, of course, you know, he missed a pass. There was a throw behind the running back that he was kind of not on the same page for, and there was another one that when he was under some pressure or he scrambled to the right and threw it to Zaccheaus, it was a little too low and he couldn't catch it. Like, this was not, you know, literal perfection, but in terms of like the different things we really wanted to see from Caleb in terms of progress and growth and taking in the offense, that to me came through loud and clear and was a lot less about it, whether it was backups or starters, right? Stuff that happens after the catch or exactly how tight the coverage is here and there. Like, to me, it's not so much, that's the stuff that's not as meaningful as important here, but it's the footwork, it's the mechanics, it's the delivery. And then like we see little glimpses of Ben Johnson, I don't even want to say wrinkles, but like that slant route to Zacchaeus. I think Greg Olson pointed it out where they did a switch release where Zacchaeus was like on the inside, and I don't remember who the other receiver was on the outside, and then the outside guy goes in and the inside guy goes out. They switch, but then Zacchaeus essentially starts inside, goes to the outside, and then slants back to the inside. And you see like the route concept and the route running help create that separation. So it ends up being just an easy slant for Caleb Williams, but for the defense, they don't know exactly where Zacchaeus is going. It almost looks like a double move at that point in the process. Or there was the second pass to Colston Loveland, that sort of like in route over the middle of the field, where it's the concept is just a high-low and it's like a layered read. It's right there where Zacchaeus kind of runs a curl and then Loveland goes behind him, and Caleb is basically able to read two receivers at the same time while looking in one direction because they're sort of just stacked over each other visually, and he just kind of has to read, if they go for the underneath guy, I throw it over top. If they go for the over top guy, I throw it underneath. Like, it's stuff that shouldn't be too difficult or crazy innovative from Ben Johnson by any means, but it's just stuff it's the basic stuff that was missing from the offense last season that's just so refreshing to see Caleb get to execute this kind of a structure that works so well, even when it's some of the more basic stuff. And so that's very much independent of the opponent. And then just operational things. There wasn't any issue with getting up to the line of scrimmage with plenty of time on the play clock. There weren't delays getting guys lined up. They didn't have trouble with guys lining up in the wrong spots and Caleb needing to run over there and switch them around, say, no, you're over there, no, you're over there, moving back and forth. I don't think there were any offensive penalties there was the holding on Dahlman, I guess, but there was no false start. There was no illegal formation. Although if you watch the game closely, Braxton Jones a couple of times got away with moving a little bit early. It kind of like what Jawan Taylor in the Chiefs does, where he jumps like a half a second early and they don't usually call it. Like Braxton Jones got away with a couple of those in this game, but it just felt like from the huddle to the play coming in to executing, like everything looked sharp and smooth. And like that, if you had any doubts because of the mixed reports coming out of training camp, which I've been trying to sort of downplay on this podcast as not that big of a deal, but if you had any doubts, like this is a complete alleviation of said doubts. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to go to week 1 against the Vikings and fire on all cylinders and complete 6 of the 7 passes and have a perfect passer rating the first drive and drive down for a touchdown and be up 28-0 like they were on the Bills. Like it's not to say that because they did this against the Bills means they're now going to be a finished product week 1 against the Vikings. But this is their way of saying like, hey, we can do it. When the circumstances are right and the situation is right, like this can work. And now we all know what it looks like when it does work. And so we kind of have a standard to then compare regular season to and say, okay, like we've seen what this offense can look like when it's really clicking. Now let's see how often they can actually consistently have it click like that. And of course, in the preseason like this, no Joe Tooney, no DeAndre Swift. You were missing like 3 or 4 running backs in this game, and they weren't game planning for the Bills, right? So it's never going to be translatable success or failure to the regular season. And so it'll be another test to see what they do against the Vikings in week 1, but to just kind of have that monkey off the back of saying, okay, we've seen it all look like it's clicking and working together. Whew, deep breath. There's the relief. The offense should be all set. We're also seeing a few of the different position battles and some spots on this Bears depth chart start to look even more set after this second preseason game. So we'll check in on the defensive line, the offensive line, the wide receiver position, and a couple other spots next on Locked On Bears. This episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, sometimes it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. But that's where talking to a licensed therapist through Betterhelp can make all the difference. You get real personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. I do online therapy, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and it helps me way more than anything I've ever just read online. And so BetterHelp is a great way for you to get started. They have over 30,000 therapists and making it easy to fit into your schedule. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So now that the starters have shown us, like, all right, we can do it, and this is what it looks like. This now we can kind of, like, I don't want to say just move past that, but we're not going to see the starters again the rest of the preseason, so we literally will be forced to move past it, right? And then it takes us back to just trying to figure out the rest of this 53-man roster and really, like, the rest of this depth chart for some of these battles that are still ongoing. And, like, the third preseason game will be a factor in there. But things are lining up pretty tightly now to where I think we have a decent sense of what this team is going to look like, knowing that injuries or other things can change that. And we're going to talk about some of those injuries a little bit later on today. But, like, first of all, I guess if we just start at the quarterback position, I mean, to me, Tyson Bagent is very clearly the number 2 quarterback, and Case Keenum is then very clearly the number 3 quarterback. I don't think that was a super big question, and people love to try and stir any kind of, like, even like quarterback controversy with how sharp Tyson Bagent has looked at times this offense, but, like, that's obviously not real. But Bagent is a really sharp backup and somebody that is very valuable for the Bears to have, especially on such a cheap contract like that. Tyson Bagent looks good, and you can feel pretty good about it. You know, again, I don't know if Bagent's gonna, come in and win you 10 regular season games if he's your starter, but as far as backup quarterbacks go, you feel like you're sitting pretty with Tyson Bagent. At wide receiver, a couple of things that stood out in this game. First of all, like, Olamide Zaccheaus, we mentioned his touchdown on the slant. Like, yes, it's against backups, so I'm not going to go over the moon about, how great he was, but, like, he's someone who has been the real talk of training camp as someone who's going to be a legitimate playmaker in this offense. And it was nice to see that really come to fruition, right? To see it firsthand. It was only that one catch for 36 yards and a touchdown is what he ultimately ended up getting in the stat sheet there. But it was just like, oh yeah, that's it. Ran a nice route, got open, made a guy miss after the catch. Kind of surprised. I didn't expect Zaccheaus to be the guy who takes a slant route 36 yards for a score, right? Like, there just wasn't quite the skill set of the playmaking I anticipated right away out of the gate. Not that he can't do it, but, like, it's not what he's known for, right? I mean, he's a reliable over-the-middle slot receiver route runner type who can also play on the outside and not necessarily playmaker after the catch who makes guys miss, and that's where I come back to being some backups. But it was just like, oh yeah, that's why he's clearly the number 3 wide receiver, and guys like Luther Burden and Tyler Scott are very clearly a step below them on the depth chart. I'll mention also quickly Rome Odunze, 1 target, 1 drop. Nothing to panic about, but everyone was getting in on the action. DJ Moore had a nice catch. Zaccheaus had a nice touchdown. Colson Loveland, Cole Kmet, and Rome Odunze gets 1 ball, hits him in the hands, can't hold on to it. And nothing to worry about, nothing to panic about, nothing to make a big deal about, but just interesting to note. Everybody had such a good day, and he was the one, like, womp womp, but he'll be fine. I'm still expecting very big things from Rome Odunze. But then this did feel like a slight elevation for Luther Burden on the depth chart. We did not see Devin Duvernay play at all in this game, but in the first preseason game, when the backups were in, it was Scott and Duvernay were the first receivers off the bench in that regard, and Luther Burden was very clearly then number 6, right? He was the 3rd of the bench receivers, the 6th man on the wide receiver depth chart there. With Duvernay out, that got Burden in the game sooner. He looked, more like a number 4, number 5 receiver, made a couple of nice catches, also made some really nice blocks. I was glad that Greg Olson and company in the broadcast pointed those out. That's something that reputationally, fair or not, his reputation coming out of college at Missouri was that he wasn't the most motivated blocker and was accused of taking some plays off and not always being super engaged when the ball wasn't coming his way. But clearly, whether that was fair or not, we are seeing evidence of him being not only a willing blocker, but a quality blocker and someone who is very engaged and wants to be physical and a part of that. So it's all buy-in for Ben Johnson's system and the culture that he's trying to set at that receiver position there. So I'm really encouraged by those guys. And it feels to me like at this point, Tyler Scott's got a spot on the 53-man roster. Like you've got, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Olamide Zaccheaus, Luther Burden, Devin Duvernay, Tyler Scott. Like that feels like your 6 wide receivers at this point. Maurice Alexander was the next guy up off the bench. I don't think they're going to keep 7 unless somebody gets hurt in between now and the start of the regular season. So like that feels pretty set in stone. I guess if Duvernay is hurt, I don't know if he just got a veteran day off or if he's actually injured. I mean, that could, I guess, change things. Because we did see in the return game, 3 different wide receivers get some options back there. Tyler Scott had the kickoff that he didn't exactly hold on to, but again, shows that they're willing to use him on special teams a lot and that he's got a 53-man roster spot. Zaccheaus, fair caught a punt. Luther Burden, I think, fair caught his punt. And those are significant to me, A, because it shows those 3 guys having special teams value even as backups, but B, it wasn't anyone else that was fighting for a roster spot. You didn't have a corner back there or a running back there who's like somebody who might be an end of the roster guy. Like, you could see, I don't even know who, Josh Blackwell, he didn't play in this game either, but like you could see Josh Blackwell being back there or somebody else. But the fact that it was those 3 receivers in particular getting the first cracks at it tells me like those 3 guys are probably all, of course, like Burden's safe and Zaccheaus, but like having Scott back there as well, like that tells you kind of where their head's at from a special team standpoint, and maybe not some of the other players at that position. We should get to the offensive line. I probably should have led with the offensive line at the top this segment, but like Braxton Jones is your starting left tackle. Said it last week. I think people were trying to accuse me of being a little too premature on that, but it's like, I described it as like calling it like an election, right? Yes, the election's not over, but I'm calling the race for Braxton Jones. He had a good game. I got to go back through and watch the tape, but on the first watch through, there were a couple times when he struggled with some speed on the edge a little bit here and there, but for the most part, did a pretty good job. He's going to be your starting left tackle. And Theo Benedict's been a great story. I'm still not even totally convinced Theo Benedict makes the 53. I think they're going to try and stash him on the practice squad again, but we'll see how that all ends up kind of shaking out because you got to put Karan Namagaji somewhere. Ozzie Trapillo being your top backup right tackle at this point makes it pretty clear. They held out Joe Tooney because he's a veteran, but really encouraged by Luke Newman, the 6th-round pick, filling in as your starting left guard in this game. He's definitely on the 53. Like you've got for sure your starting 5 on the roster of Jones, Tooney, Dahlman, Jackson Wright, and then Trapillo's obviously making the roster as your 6th swing tackle. Ryan Bates is making the roster as your backup center, and Luke Newman is definitely he's got to be sticking around as a guard at this point. That's 8. So then does Karan Namagaji make it as 9? Probably. So then Theo Benedict goes to the practice squad because I don't think they're going to keep 10. And maybe they end up cutting Luke Newman and trying to stash him on the practice squad too, but he started this game at left guard. He was very clearly their first choice off the bench at guard. So that like how many offensive linemen do they keep question is going to be interesting. But I think if I'm not ready to like lock this in as like an official prediction, but like I can see an outcome here where they cut Theo Benedict and everyone is floored because he was getting first team left tackle reps. And, obviously has shown a lot of great improvement. And people are like, oh, no, they're going to lose Theo Benedict. And he'll line, as every year, he'll end up on the practice squad and, it'll be just fine. So that's kind of what I'm watching out for on the offensive line there. And then on the defensive line, the name that stood out to me in this game was Chris Williams, the defensive tackle they traded for at the end of last preseason from the Cleveland Browns. He was getting in there playing with the starters. It was Montez Sweat, Gervon Dexter, Chris Williams, and Dio Odengbo. And of course, Grady Jarrett didn't play in this game, but like to me, Chris Williams is a lock for this 53-man roster. You got Jarrett, Billings, Dexter, Williams for sure. And then Shamar Turner's coming back from the injury, so he's got to make it as a 5th one. So then Zach Pickens gone? Or do you keep 6 defensive tackles? Or, I guess, did they feel like they could stash Chris Williams on the practice squad? They had to trade a 6th-round pick for him last year, so I'm guessing they might not feel like they can get away with putting him on the practice squad, but why have him play with the starters in a preseason game if you're not pretty confident in him being a big part of your defensive tackle rotation this season? So that's going to be really interesting. I spent this whole time thinking Zach Pickens, there's no way they cut him. They got to keep patience with him. But at this point, I'm starting to come around on what other people have been saying, that he might be not long for this roster because he, again, wasn't standing out as a dynamic difference maker for me in this game. Andrew Billings got a sack in there. And of course, good to see Austin Booker get back in the sack category again. He clearly has jumped past Dominic Robinson on the depth chart. In the last game, Robinson and Tano Passanio were the first 2 backup defensive ends. This game, it was Booker and Tano Passanio, and then Robinson was kind of fifth man on the defensive line depth chart. So that's one to keep an eye on too. Like Robinson could be on his way out. If Booker and Passanio are the 3 and the 4, do they want to keep 5 defensive ends? We'll see. They got to keep a lot of depth at a lot of different positions, and they got to figure out who they're going to keep at running back. They're probably going to need another running back, and now another cornerback goes down, and that looked pretty darn severe. So we'll check in on how injuries at those 2 positions in particular could end up shaping how the 53-man roster looks when it's all said and done. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back and in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I do fantasy football on Yahoo, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. It's a great time to get started because they're celebrating 28 years of fantasy football greatness, and Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. So to kick things off, they recently dropped Yahoo Fantasy's Guillotine Leagues. It's a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where each week the lowest scoring team in the league gets eliminated until there's only one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new game mode a try. Or if you're more into the classics, that's fine. You can still play in those head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. I fear that Ryan Poles is going to be in one of these tricky situations at 53-man roster cutdown day where because of injuries, namely at running back and cornerback, he might have to do some roster magic here, keep a couple extra players on the initial 53, then put those guys on injured reserve, and then bring back a couple guys that we were surprised got cut at the 53-man cut down deadline. Because in this game against the Bills, obviously we saw Terrell Smith go down with what was mostly a non-contact leg injury, looked to be holding his knee, seemed to be in a lot of pain, carted off. I never like to jump to conclusions, but that feels like, Lord knows what the injury is, but that feels like a severe injury. That feels like a potentially season-ending type of injury, or an injury that certainly is going to keep him out weeks, not days, probably months, not weeks even. I don't know what it was. I'm not a doctor, but that was pretty easy to call. I mean, you hope for the best, but I feel pretty safe assuming that one ain't good. And that we're probably not going to see Terrell Smith much this season. And so if it is indeed a clear, torn ACL or whatever out for the year, well, then they can throw him on the injured reserve list now and clear up that roster spot. But it becomes a little bit tricky when we get to the 53-man roster cutdown day because you've got Jalen Johnson potentially on track to return for week 1, doing some pregame warmups, looking healthy-ish. Should be all right there, hopefully, in theory. You got Kyler Gordon, who's week to week, not ruled out for week 1 either. And now, assuming Terrell Smith is probably cooked for the rest of the season, then it depends on how healthy Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon are for week 1. Because if you feel like either one of them might miss 2 or 3 or 4 games, then you might want to put them on injured reserve and free up that roster spot for a little while. But you can only use the short-term injured reserve, the not season-ending, but where you can bring them back. You can only do that if they are on the 53-man roster after the deadline. So, if you can't put somebody on injured reserve before cutdown day and make it short-term. It's only after cutdown day can you make an injured reserve short-term. So you would have to keep the injured player on your 53-man roster for that first deadline day. Then the next day, you can put him on short-term injured reserve. You get that roster spot open again, and then you can bring back somebody else in his spot, but you had to keep that injured player on the roster at first. And so and we don't know the extent, sounds like Jalen Johnson's going to be fine. Kyler Gordon, we don't have much of an indication of, but say hypothetically, one of those two guys is going to miss 4 games, and you want to put him on short-term injured reserve, you have to keep him on your 53-man roster at cutdown day first. Then you could put him on IR. So that means you're going to have to, he's going to have to occupy a roster spot temporarily in someone else's place. And so maybe eventually you put one of those guys on and then you bring back another cornerback, like Trey Flowers seems to be probably the next man up on the outside there, or Nick McLeod in the slot if it's going to be Kyler Gordon. But then in the meantime, you got to cut somebody else. So whether that's, if that's how Theo Benedict goes at first, right? You cut him and then you put Gordon on injured reserve or whatever, and then you bring Theo Benedict back. Like, that's how you kind of have to move the bodies around a little bit as more like a technicality type of thing of like, well, we got to cut you for now, but we're going to bring you back tomorrow. We just have to cut you so that we can get through the deadline, then put a player on injured reserve, and then we'll bring you back. Like that to me is something that becomes a more real possibility for this team, either at corner or running back, where DeAndre Swift doesn't play, Roschon Johnson's injured with a foot injury, Colin Monungai sits out this game with some sort of injury or something. It sounds like maybe at the joint practice there might have been something. We don't know exactly what's going on there. Travis Homer doesn't play. So all of a sudden your top 4 running backs don't play in this game. So undrafted rookie free agent Deion Hankins out of Texas State gets the start, and then he gets hurt a couple of drives into the game. So then you're bringing in the guy you just signed off the street, Britton Brown, who had been with the Seahawks practice squad last season. I think the Raiders he'd played a little bit with before there, and he plays a bunch, and then Ian Wheeler comes in. But you have 3 healthy running backs on this roster right now, it seems like, or 3 running backs that they could even use, and I guess one of those got hurt, so it was kind of 2 for the rest of this Bills preseason game. And so I wonder if the Bears, depending on the severity of these injuries, call up Jamal Williams, who they brought in for a workout last week, who played for Ben Johnson and the Detroit Lions, played with Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints, like a lot of connections there. A veteran running back would know the system. He's not there to be a starter. He's not there to unseat DeAndre Swift, but just somebody who, you can trust when you have a bunch of injuries at that position. And then we come back to the same conversation where it's like, is Roschon Johnson's injury enough for a short-term injured reserve? So then you have to keep him on your initial 53 to then put him on injured reserve and then bring somebody else back. I mean, I imagine Swift should be fine for week 1. Monungai should be fine for week 1. If Travis Homer's going to make this team, probably seems like he'll be fine. Roschon's kind of the big question mark there from an injury standpoint, but then it shapes the 53 on keeping him at first to get him to injured reserve to then free up another spot to bring someone else back. And so that's going to make everyone's 53-man roster predictions really difficult this year, because I think whatever roster the Bears submit at the deadline for the 53 is not going to be the exact same roster that they then take the field with week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. That somebody's going to go somewhere in some kind of injured reserve thing, or they're going to claim somebody else on waivers, or whatever it might be. I still think this roster won't be quite a finished product there, but we'll still try our best. We'll put together a 53-man roster prediction at some point here in the near future on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this upcoming season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Come on back tomorrow. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.